Well, welcome everyone to our latest episode of The Graveyard Shift. And again, the purpose of this podcast is to provide you with some ideas and some inspiration on improving your funeral home's operations and connecting your business with more families. And this podcast is brought to you by Passari. Again, my name is Todd Carlson. Thanks for listening. And I'm the Chief Sales Officer for Directors Investment Group's family of companies, which include Passari Directors, Funeral Directors Life, and ClaimCheck. We've got our panel back with us this week, and again, we've got Matt Bailey here from Bailey Family Funeral Homes in Connecticut, Jimmy Lucas with out of here in Fort Worth, Texas, and then Gary Freitag in Ohio. So, again, a motley cast of characters, and
I thought
looks
you were
like
going to say automotive repair, Lucas Automotive Repair. You stuttered on that, Todd. I didn't know where we were going.
Well,
I was ready to audible.
Yeah, how are your auto mechanic skills, Jimmy?
You know, we got 30-something vehicles and are a pain in my ass, I can tell you that. No one knows how to change oil or put air in the tires, so yeah. Thanks for bringing it up, Todd.
Yeah, well, Jimmy, it's almost that time of year to put the spring air back in the tires.
I know, we try to do that early April.
Yeah.
Do they tell you that it's okay, it's only flat on the bottom?
Yeah. I heard something like yesterday in the car. It was making a ticking noise.
See, what's that red check engine light? All right. Well, so we want to. Well, last week we had a really good visit about some of the more meaningful and touching services that you folks have handled through your businesses, and I really I think that was real helpful, I believe, to our listeners and our viewers. So thanks for sharing. This year we're kind of going to let the pendulum maybe swing to the other side, and talk a little bit about some of the more challenging cases and families that you've had over the years, because I think not only do we learn from our all those services where we add meaning and we celebrate a life in the right way, we learn from that. We also probably have learned from the school of hard knocks and have learned from our more challenging experiences as well. So I thought it'd be really interesting today to unpack a couple of situations that each of you have found yourselves in or your staff in over the years, and maybe share, some of the lessons learned there. So, so Jim, you got a grin on your face, man. How could I not?
Like, this is a vulnerable conversation, right? Because no funeral director wants to say that they've screwed up or they had a family and they found themselves in a difficult spot. But I would say anybody that's been doing it for a minute that says that they haven't found themselves there is a liar. And you're helping these families, and we wake up every morning to make a difficult time a little easier and help walk that grief walk with those families. And so when you have a misstep or a mistake or something went awry, that really hurts your heart as a funeral professional, because that's not why we get up and do what we do. So it's been about a year. I'll start. We had a case, family came in, was going really well, and then it came down to a communication piece with one of our funeral directors, returning the cremated remains, and he returned the cremated remains instead to the husband, his wife's cremated remains to the husband, he sent to the deceased mother. And that did not go over very well because she was in a different country. Yeah. And so we had to say, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry doesn't fix those things, right? So, and what for us, my thought is there's really nothing other than you look into it and there's brutal honesty. There is extreme ownership, and I'm sorry doesn't fix it. And the takeaway is we want to learn from this, so no one else has to experience this. This is why we do not get up in the morning to have this type of mistake. And then how can we help you move forward in this by correcting it and then honoring your wife? Because at the end, that's what we were here to do. And so we found ourselves in that, and it was a delicate conversation, which turned into a monetary donation to a charitable organization in the memory of his wife. So that actually, if I'm not a lawyer, but if I was, they would say that worked out well, because they don't always work out well. And there's a lot worse things that can happen. But that was for me, being really involved in it, having that conversation because the funeral director wasn't here to have that conversation anymore. He was fired, right? He was given the opportunity to go somewhere else. So all the folks that were still here had to have that conversation. And so
Yeah.
I always say it's easier to disarm the bomb before it goes off. So the more time we have the opportunity to visit with our coworkers about potential problems, the better opportunity we have to serve that family and not have these monster mistakes. And that was a monster mistake. All
Yes.
is well. He wrote a nice letter. He sent us the charity, and he actually came back and said, I think it was toward the end of this last year, he sent a note like, "Hey, it's end of the year giving if you care to give more money." So I'm like, I think we're good. I think we're good.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was an instance. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Todd, but that resonated with me when you asked that question.
Yeah, I think that's a really solid story. It's very relatable and an easy mistake to make, right? Um, Not an easy mistake to recover from. So, it begs the question: Did you get the wife's cremated remains back?
We worked it all out, and of course there was some family dynamics, right? I mean, of course there were
Always.
family dynamics, and it was like paperwork, communication. It was right there on. We did the paperwork right. It said who the cremated remains were supposed to be released to. The ashes were depending. That's a whole nother question. Do you call it cremated remains, or ashes? Anyways, um, it was right there who was to receive those, and he failed. We failed. I failed, even though I didn't know anything about it until at the end. So ownership, shit rolls downhill, and we're good catchers, right? So that's our job.
Yeah, we have a different saying about that here at our office. We say that crap is gravity defying because it flows uphill. So,
Okay, perfect.
I like that. I'm
same
gonna use that.
idea.
I often feel like I sit on an upside down pyramid, so it's
There you go. Yeah, it's what funnels with greater intensity your way.
yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing, Jimmy. Hey, Matt, what about you? You have a situation that comes to mind that you would like to share?
No.
Everything's perfect at Bailey Family
I
Funeral
knew
Homes. Yeah.
I knew that jackwagon was going to say that.
I've heard there are funeral directors who make mistakes.
Oh,
No, I strangely enough, there's some overlap and some similarities, I think, between Jimmy's story, because I had a similar situation a bit back where we had a gentleman who passed away, and he had for many years lived with his long-term partner, and they never got married. And he had his daughter, and the daughter and his partner, they didn't get along well with each other, particularly. And they when he passed, though, the director who was sitting with them explained, chain of custody by our statutes and who's in control, who's in charge. They both came in. Partner, she was also the executrix, so in her mind, when things were starting, she thought she's in control of everything, and we had to explain there's estate matters and there's disposition matters and different parties. So they came in, and she paid or signed and paid the bill, swiped her card, and did all of that. And the daughter came and signed all the cremation paperwork, and they had an agreement that they're going to go off to a cemetery and have a burial there. I don't recall if there was talk about splitting a portion of the ashes or not. I think at that stage of the game there was talk about splitting. The way it works where we are on our cremation permit, the state tracks the intended disposition of remains. So you have the option of saying it was returned to a person. You have the option of putting a cemetery name down. You have the option of doing other and typing something in. Because we had a graveside service scheduled and planned, we put the name and location of the cemetery. But we had a week or two in between when the burial was going to happen and when the cremation took place. So the executrix called up and said, I'm going to stop by and I'm going to pick up the certified copies of the death certificate and the ashes, because I'm going to bring them home before the cemetery. So she, again, was not the next of kin who signed everything. So I called the daughter up and I said, I just received a phone call from, the other woman. And she indicated that she's going to get the certified copies, as makes sense. She's handling the estate, but also she mentioned she was going to bring your dad home with her prior to the burial and keep him there. And she said, okay. Woman came in, picked up, went off. I wrote down the day and the time. We documented the conversation that it took place. Did not get an actual signature from her saying she could take the ashes home. And then she called up maybe 2 days later and said, yeah, you should not have released the cremains to her. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm like, I called you up and I actually voiced this with you and you said it was okay. And she said, no, I said, okay, not okay.
Oh, oh.
To which I said, huh. Prove
Words
that.
matter, Matt.
Yeah. Oops. Oh man.
prove that. Prove tone and intent. And she was very technically polite and very passive aggressive in the conversation as well as we were going along. And she basically said, you better call her up and you better get those cremains back because I want to come down this afternoon and I want to pick them up. So I called the girlfriend up and I explained the situation. And there had been mounting tension along the way here.
Matt, this sounds like Thelma and Louise, by the way. We're getting to the crescendo.
This is such a funny podcast. And then we, so on the release that we have, there is a caveat in there that says if it is determined that the person who received the ashes is not the appropriate party, they are obligated to immediately upon notice return the cremains. Failure to do so may be considered theft and will be reported to the proper authorities. So I called her up and I'm like, listen, nobody wants us to get to this point. Like, obviously this is not going to be good for anybody, but you're not stepdaughter, but the woman, like she could make this an unpleasant situation for all parties involved. And I don't think you want the local police knocking on your door or end up on the news because you stole someone's ashes. And I certainly don't want that. And she just was like, I will get them back at my own time when I'm able to. This is too much today. And she like hung up the phone. So then I spent the next 12 hours going back and forth between the two on the phone. And at one point, the woman was really getting frustrated. And she goes, we spent so much money with this lawyer to avoid all of this nonsense. I don't understand why, I have to be doing this. And I was like, well, the lawyer should have executed a document which would appoint you as the responsible party. And that supersedes all these things. And you'd be in charge of all of this. And she's like, well, why didn't he do that? And I'm like, you have to ask your lawyer. I don't know the answer to that question. Funny story. They did. So she produced the document. The lawyer, and it took the lawyer about, it was a Saturday or something, till the next Monday to do it. And things had devolved so much between she and the daughter that the daughter, who was supposed to get a portion of the ashes before burial, she's like, I changed my mind. I don't want her to have any of the ashes now. And she was fully in charge and didn't have to do anything. And the daughter had been a little unpleasant to her throughout the process. And the woman with that document took full and total control. But for me, I think the important thing that I've learned in doing this and that helped me the most going, because I don't think they were ever mad at me in the process. I think that the daughter was a little bit because the cremains were released because she said, okay, not okay. But the thing was, I think that people, especially with their family disputes, they want to be heard. And Jimmy probably could speak more to it as a social worker, or Gary as a Harvard alum. I think, ultimately, even if they don't get what they want and they're not 100% on board and happy and they're mad at somebody else, I think the most important thing the funeral director could do is let them know that they're being heard. Not necessarily taking sides, not necessarily we could explain what the law requires of us and that here's where we do and do not have choices and options and what our obligations are. But just letting them know, I hear that you are really frustrated. I hear this is upsetting, and gosh, that sounds hard. And that's really all we could do.
Well, isn't it?
Document.
Yes, that helps too.
Yeah,
My God,
record
yes,
the phone
yes.
call with the.
Yeah, like yes, you can absolutely come do that. I'm gonna need the signature from so and so to change that directive. I mean, NFDA has some great sample legal forms for little things like that. We use them all the time. If there's resources out there, I mean, they got some weird stuff on there for legal resources.
Well, yeah, and the reason they have the weird stuff is right because someone
It's
probably
happened.
needed it. Yeah,
It's
something
happened.
happened. Yeah, the exceptions create all kinds of interesting documents. Well, Matt, that's really great advice, though. I mean, the idea that just that empathy, right? Letting that empathy overflow and your understanding. And again, I think we have to, when we talk about how to resolve conflict, empathy goes a long way. And even if you're not agreeing, just saying they've been heard and understood. And we don't have to say we agree, but man, when people feel understood, that goes a long way.
Yeah, we talked a little bit last week about the influence in funeral service of Doug Manning. I was just at his funeral earlier in the week, and he worded it about getting in people's buckets. And that's what we have to do. We can't be putting our own stuff on them. We just need to get in with them and find out who they are and where they are and listen and just really understand what's driving their thoughts and their feelings in that moment, and without judgment, be present. I think in his book, The Power of Presence, or if, like many of us who his video, if that's easier for you, I think are the must view or must read components for funeral service for full-time licensed people and part-time people alike, because that skill and that understanding changed how I worked as a funeral director. It changed the trajectory of our funeral homes, and it saves you a lot in some very difficult situations when you also learn that you don't
a commission off of that.
Yeah, 8%. Yeah, 8%.
Small royalty.
Do we have enough time? Do we have enough time for all of Gary's screw ups? I mean,
no, you do not. I remember when I was 5.
Before I went to Harvard, yeah. So Gary got to Harvard when he was 6. Hey, so let's. Hey, I want to remind our listeners though that they can send their feedback to thegraveyardshift@passari.com. We love your feedback throughout our time here, and I'll repeat that email address. But email us your thoughts, your comments, your ideas, or some potential ideas for future episodes. And also maybe even an idea for a stupid human trick that Gary could help us out with if we could capture that moment. So,
Super Dave.
Hey, the graveyardshift@passari.com. Gary, if you'd like to share your story with us.
So much to choose from. I'm going to pick one where nobody made a mistake. We just got thrown into a situation that was really difficult. So we had a young man who died of multiple gunshot wounds, and they wanted to use us for the funeral. And so the day of the funeral, my managing funeral director called me up and said, I think we may have a problem, because somewhere between half and 2/3 of the attendees to the funeral wore F the police t-shirts over the top of their whatever they were wearing. And we had no idea, but the decedent was the head of the local gang that's in the neighborhood next to Spring Grove. It was actually called the Taliban, but all of its members were African American. So
how long have you been a member of that, Gary?
I joined in 79, I think, but I've got this scar. No. So anyway, what had happened was the gang thought he had been lured to the place where he was ambushed by his girlfriend. And the girlfriend wanted to say goodbye, so she showed up in disguise. But the wife was attending the funeral. And so I don't know whether let's just say it was a fight erupted. Guns were drawn in the funeral home, many of them, because we were unaware there were at least 5 undercover cops as part of the funeral party. So what happened was the undercover cops drew their weapons. They took all the funeral directors and locked them into a room and put a guard outside the room. And then they cleared the entire funeral home. It was well over 200 people. And the cops were noticing things like sawed-off shotguns and trunks and things like that. But they managed to get everybody out of the funeral home. They allowed 12 people to come back in. They said they went to the widow and said, "You get to pick 11 other people," and that's all.
COVID funeral.
Yeah, exactly. The first one. This was pre-COVID. And then after the funeral, they left. They didn't bury at Spring Grove. There's a cemetery across the other side of the highway from us, and that's where their family heritage was. About 20 minutes after they left the funeral home, every police car in the area went to that cemetery because they were firing guns into the air around the or into the casket. I don't know. We weren't over there. All right. So obviously some things to learn from there. But I have to tell you the follow on, because a week later, another African-American gunshot wound victim, we were told he was carjacked. And so we went and picked him up, took him under our care. And we found out the next day, no, it was the number 2 guy in the gang that had just stepped up to take over. And he was trying to retaliate and managed to get himself killed. And the managing funeral director said, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "Call the widow and say," or the mother, I think it was the mother, and say, "Look, we cannot do this funeral." And she went to the local TV stations, said it was racially based, that her son was a college student, he had nothing to do with any gangs, and that we were
Did
just.
he go to Harvard?
No, he did not go. He was at the University of Cincinnati, a fine institution that my parents went to. Yeah. But what we found out was he had a rap sheet 3 feet thick. He was a 36-year-old freshman at the University of Cincinnati and had been for quite some time.
Checks out.
So we said no. The local media called me, and I said, "This is why we're not doing this. It's a safety issue." And I do not often compliment the media on any side, but in this case, they had the brains not to run the story. So it just went away. Mm-hmm. I think they also called the police, and the police told them, "We can't comment, but no, that's not what's going on here."
They said, "We liked your T-shirts last time."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we managed to dodge that. We offered to deliver the decedent anywhere in the city of Cincinnati at our cost. I think we'd already embalmed him, if I'm not mistaken. So they got some free services from us, but that was just, hey, we're not doing it. And there are 2 things I got out of this. One is I met with my managing funeral director after this whole thing was over. And she said, "Why did you decide not to do the funeral? We could have gotten sued for racial discrimination." And I said, "I would much rather fight a racial discrimination lawsuit than have to call the spouse of one of my employees and say, 'Hey, I'm really sorry. We did a high-risk funeral and things went awry and your husband or wife is now no longer with us.'" So sometimes you, as the CEO or the owner or whatever, you got to tell the lawyers, go pound sand. I understand it's a risk, but I'm taking the risk because I'm not going to put my employee in that situation. The other thing that was kind of fascinating, and I would suggest funeral homes at least explore this if you end up in situations like this, is I met with the head of the gang task force for the city of Cincinnati. And I said, "Guys, why couldn't you notify us that that's who we were burying, right?" And we were also unaware there was a SWAT team out in the cemetery in camo, just in case things were right. That's when they started seeing the shotguns in the back of the cars and the trunks and stuff. I said, "How come you couldn't notify us? I mean, my employees are right in the middle of this." And they said, "Look, we are legally unable to discuss any element of an ongoing investigation." And they had been fighting with the Taliban for several years. Fortunately, the end of the story is they got rid of them. They eliminated the gang. But when I was talking to the gangland or the gang officer, I said, "Look, if you can't tell us anything about an ongoing investigation, can we have a policy that if we have somebody that dies of multiple gunshot wounds, that we can call you up and say, 'Is this a funeral we want to do?' And all you have to say is yes or no. You don't have to tell me what they're suspected of, what you're investigating, any of that stuff. Is this a high-risk funeral or is it not?" And we've had one other one that we said, no, we're going to pass on. And that was, I want to say this was the original incident was 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. So we haven't had it since, but it's comforting to know we can call up the head of the local police district and say, hey, this is who the decedent is. He's got 5 gunshot wounds in him. Is this somebody that's going to be a high risk funeral? So at least we know what we're dealing with. So I know it's kind of a long story, but there were a lot of wrinkles to it as we went through it.
And as you said, Gary, that's just one of those situations you find, your staff finds themselves in unbeknownst to them. And then, what was it like navigating that real time and live? I mean, you don't have all the information or limited information. What was that like?
Well, unfortunately, I've been in several situations like this where the press gets involved. Yes, you definitely want to. Yeah, I don't mean personally, guys. I know Jimmy's back there laughing again.
I find myself in many hostage situations
Yes.
tied to a tree with
experience with the
camouflage men in my
Taliban.
cemetery. When I was a leader of the Taliban before I joined Spring Grove,
I remember when I could fly.
Yes, in the jungles of El Salvador.
pound sand lawyers.
And I actually do at ICCFA University. I teach a class on crisis management, which was based on a monument I got involved with.
That's where I thought you were going with this when it all began.
Yeah.
You want to see the SpongeBob thing? You can Google it. I'm not going to talk about it here. But the most important, yes, you want to talk to the lawyers, but you have to ultimately make the decision based on your assessment and what the risks are. And sometimes you have to tell the lawyers, look, I hear you, but we got to go this way. I'm willing to take this risk. The other thing I would tell you is go slow. Try not to put a lot out there, certainly not in writing, until you get more information. So, for instance, in the other issue, the lawyer said, whatever you do, don't admit guilt. And the circumstances, this is not this case, the SpongeBob case, the circumstances were, we were absolutely wrong. There was no gray area. We made a big mistake. One of my employees had a lapse in judgment. And I said, guys, I'm not doing that. I'm not putting a statement out or going on the local TV station and sounding like a used car salesman from 1975. Well, gee whiz, we didn't really get everything they didn't really hear. You can't do that in a situation where it's black and white.
What kind of cars are you buying in 1975?
I don't know. That's the first time
Datsun.
I
You were
car.
shopping from. That's a Pontiac if I ever heard it.
Exactly. But the point is to go slow and to be careful what you put out there. But if the situation is you're absolutely dead wrong and there's no gray area, don't be afraid to say, look, we made a mistake here. We had an error in judgment. It's human error. We're going to do everything we can to make the situation right at our expense. But, we're trying to resolve this. I think what I said in the SpongeBob thing, we're trying to resolve this with the family to properly memorialize this person and yet still live within the standards of Spring Grove. So, that's my advice when you get in crisis management. And the last thing I tell you is do not go on the air ever. The part of the crisis management is managing the media. And in today's media, they're driven by ratings because now all the news shows are all profit centers. So they're there to drive ratings, which means they're drive emotion. It's how do I get anger, empathy, outrage in the viewing public. And so they will amp up the emotional elements to that story. And if you think you're going to be able to explain rationally how something went awry, what they will do is they'll take a 12-minute or 15-minute interview and cut it to 30 seconds, and you're going to sound like
sound bites.
Yeah, you're going to sound like an idiot. So that's the one thing. It's unfortunate. What I see now is the beginnings of the media trying to get back to, we're trying to relate the news, not give you our view of the world. And both sides, MSNBC, Fox News, and everybody in between. They're there to generate ratings. And so the truth is secondary to, did we get people's eyeballs? So
just come on the graveyard shift. We'll help you get your story out.
Reporting live from Spring Grove.
Yeah, Gary hasn't thought this all through. We are the media now.
Where's the black, the before shot with the black line through here?
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, we're at that time. We need to wrap it up. I'd like to just say thanks for your vulnerability. This is not an easy topic, but I do think it'd be greatly appreciated by those listening to just get some really good tips on how to deal with these challenging situations. So thanks for sharing, guys, and I think we've done more help than we know. So just want to close up here and just remind people to tune in to your favorite podcast channel. And again, feedback, thoughts, comments, we'd love to hear them at thegraveyardshift@passari.com. With that, please don't keep us a secret out there. Please share this podcast with your friends and your enemies. We just would love to do what we can to help our profession grow and continue to prosper. So with that, so long. Lost my
Adios.
thought.
Peace out.
All right.